My name is Daniel Hartley, and for 19 years, everyone believed I was intellectually disabled. My family told doctors I had suffered severe brain damage from childhood meningitis at age 8. They told teachers I could barely read or write. They told social workers I needed constant supervision and would never be able to live independently. They told the government I was permanently disabled and incapable of work, while simultaneously working me 60 hours a week in their business for no pay. They collected nearly $850,000 in disability benefits on my behalf over those 19 years, benefits I never saw a cent of. They also stole my inheritance, $12 million that my grandmother had left specifically to me, by presenting a fraudulent will and having me declared incompetent to challenge it. And they did all of this while making me believe that I actually was disabled, that I actually was intellectually impaired, that I was lucky they tolerated me at all. But here's the truth they never suspected: I wasn't disabled, I never had been. The meningitis had caused a temporary illness, nothing more. My cognitive abilities were completely intact. In fact, when I was finally able to take an IQ test as an adult, I scored 164 in the 99.98 percentile. For 19 years, I pretended to be exactly what they told me I was. For 19 years, I documented every crime they committed. For 19 years, I waited for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. That moment came 3 months ago. And what I did to them makes their 19 years of fraud look like petty theft. This is the story of how the simple son became the genius they never saw coming. This is the story of how disability fraud, inheritance theft, and systematic abuse became federal charges carrying 40 years in prison. This is the story of how I went from cleaning toilets to owning everything they had built on my stolen money. I need to take you back to the beginning, because what happened to me only makes sense if you understand how thoroughly they controlled my reality. I got sick when I was 8 years old, bacterial meningitis, a serious illness, but one that's treatable if caught early enough. I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, received aggressive antibiotic treatment, and made a full recovery. Or rather, I should have been recognized as making a full recovery. Instead, my father, Jonathan Hartley, saw an opportunity. My family was comfortable but not wealthy at that time. My father owned a small hotel, a 2-star property that barely turned a profit. My mother, Susan, managed the housekeeping staff. My older sister, Amanda, was 12 and already showing the entitlement that would define her entire life. And then my grandmother, my mother's mother, Margaret Chen, passed away 6 months after my illness. My grandmother had been a brilliant businesswoman. She had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s with nothing and built a successful import-export company. By the time she died, her estate was worth approximately $15 million. She had always adored me. I was her only grandson, and she used to tell me I reminded her of herself, curious, persistent, always asking questions. She took me to museums, taught me about her business, told me stories about building something from nothing. In her will, she left the bulk of her estate to be divided among her children and grandchildren. My mother received $3 million. My sister received $2 million to be held in trust until she turned 25. And I received $12 million, also in trust, with very specific instructions. The money was to be used for my education and care, managed by an independent trustee, and transferred to my control when I turned 25. My grandmother had left me the largest share because she believed I had the potential to do something meaningful with it. She had told me, months before she died, that she saw greatness in me. My father saw something different, an obstacle to his plans. $3 million would help, but it wouldn't transform the family's financial situation. What my father wanted was access to my $12 million, money that he could use to expand his hotel business, to build an empire, to elevate the Hartley name. But the will was ironclad. The independent trustee would never allow the funds to be used for anything except my direct benefit. And once I turned 25, I would have complete control, and my father would have no access at all. Unless I was declared incompetent. That's when my father had his revelation. What if the meningitis hadn't fully resolved? What if I had suffered lasting cognitive damage that hadn't been properly diagnosed? What if I was actually disabled and would never be capable of managing my own affairs? If that were true, my father could petition to become my legal guardian. He could control my inheritance. He could use the money however he wanted, as long as he could justify it as being for my care. All he had to do was prove I was disabled. And that's exactly what he did. The campaign started subtly when I was 9 years old, about a year after my grandmother's death. My father began taking me to doctors, expressing concerns about my development. He claimed I was struggling in school, having trouble with basic tasks, showing signs of cognitive impairment that he worried were related to the meningitis. The doctors examined me and found nothing wrong. My cognitive tests were normal. My academic performance was age-appropriate. I was a perfectly healthy 9-year-old boy. But my father was persistent. He took me to different doctors, different specialists, always presenting the same concerns, always suggesting that something had been missed. Eventually, he found what he was looking for, a doctor who was willing to diagnose me with post-meningitis cognitive impairment based on nothing more than my father's reports of my behavior at home. That diagnosis became the foundation of everything that followed. Armed with this diagnosis, my father began controlling every aspect of my life. He pulled me out of my regular school and enrolled me in a special education program designed for children with developmental disabilities. He told my teachers that I had severe limitations and shouldn't be challenged with grade-level work. He also began a systematic campaign of gaslighting that would last for the next 19 years. "Daniel, we need to talk about your condition," he told me when I was 10. "The doctors have confirmed that the meningitis damaged your brain. You're not like other kids. You're going to need help for your whole life." "But I feel fine," I protested. "I can do the same things other kids can do." "That's because you don't understand how disabled you are. That's part of the disability. You can't recognize your own limitations. But trust me, son, we're going to take care of you. We just need you to accept that you're different." He said this with such conviction, such apparent concern, that part of me believed him. I was 10 years old. I trusted my father. If he said I was disabled, maybe I was disabled in ways I couldn't perceive. The gaslighting intensified over time. Whenever I did something well, read a difficult book, solve a complex puzzle, demonstrate any kind of intelligence, my father would reframe it. "That's just memorization. You're good at memorizing things, but you don't really understand them. That was luck. You stumbled onto the right answer, but you can't explain how. You're having a good day. Tomorrow, you won't be able to do that anymore." He also began pointing out evidence of my disability. If I forgot something, it was proof of cognitive impairment. If I struggled with a task, it was because my brain couldn't handle complexity. If I became frustrated or emotional, it was behavioral issues related to my condition. By the time I was 12, I had internalized the narrative. I believed I was disabled. I believed I needed constant supervision. I believed I was fortunate that my family was willing to take care of someone like me. Meanwhile, my father was using my disability diagnosis to steal my inheritance. With the medical documentation he had accumulated, he petitioned the court to be appointed as my legal guardian. He argued that I was incapable of managing my own affairs and would require lifetime support. The independent trustee objected, arguing that the medical evidence was thin and that I should be given more time to develop before such a drastic determination was made. But my father had prepared for this. He brought in the doctor who had diagnosed me, who testified about my profound limitations. He brought in teachers from the special education program, who testified that I was performing well below grade level. He even brought in a psychologist who had evaluated me for 30 minutes and concluded that I had significant cognitive deficits. And crucially, he presented a document that he claimed was a revised will from my grandmother, dated 2 weeks before her death, which removed the independent trustee requirement and gave my father direct control over my inheritance in the event of my incapacity. The document was a forgery. I would eventually prove this, but at the time, the court accepted it as legitimate. The judge ruled in my father's favor. At age 12, I was declared legally incompetent. My father was appointed as my guardian and given control over my $12 million inheritance. The money that was supposed to secure my future became his personal bank account. Over the next several years, my father used my inheritance to build his hotel empire. The small 2-star property became a chain of 5 hotels across 3 states. The family moved from a modest house to a mansion. My sister attended private schools and was given every advantage money could buy. And I was told that all of this was being done for me, that the business was my future, that I should be grateful my father was managing the money so wisely, that I would always be taken care of. I believed it, because I had been so thoroughly conditioned to believe everything they told me. The work started when I was 14. "Daniel, you need to contribute to the family," my father announced. "We can't have you sitting around doing nothing all day. You need to work to feel useful." He started me in housekeeping at the original hotel. My job was to clean toilets, change linens, vacuum hallways. It was presented as therapy, work therapy, that would help me develop skills and feel productive. In reality, it was free labor. I worked 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, doing the jobs that the hotel would otherwise have to pay someone to do. I received no wages. When I asked about payment, my father explained that my room and board and medical care were my compensation, that a real job would be too much pressure for someone with my limitations. "This way you're contributing without the stress of actual employment," he said. "Isn't that better?" I accepted this explanation because I accepted everything they told me. As the hotel chain expanded, so did my responsibilities. I worked at different locations, always in housekeeping or maintenance, always doing the least desirable jobs. I was the employee who could be assigned anywhere, anytime, for any task, because I didn't have a life outside of work. I didn't have friends. My family said my disability made social relationships too difficult for me. I didn't have hobbies. I was told I should focus on simple, manageable activities. I didn't have independence. At age 18, when most people leave home, I was still living in my parents' house because I needed supervision. I also didn't have access to money. The disability benefits that were being collected on my behalf, approximately $3,000 per month in SSI and other assistance, went directly to my father as my guardian. He claimed he was using it for my care, but in reality, it was just more income for the family. By the time I was 20, I had been working in the family hotels for 6 years, had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in value through my unpaid labor, and had never seen a paycheck. And I still believed this was normal. This was what life was like for someone like me. The awakening came gradually, starting when I was 23 years old. I was working the night shift at one of the hotels, cleaning the lobby after midnight, when a guest approached me. She was a woman in her 60s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandmother. "Excuse me, do you work here?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm housekeeping." "I see, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm trying to find something to read, and I noticed the little library in the lobby. Do you know if guests are allowed to borrow books?" "Yes, that's fine, help yourself." She selected a book, then paused. "Are you a reader?" The question surprised me. No one ever asked me about my interests. Yes, I like to read." "What kind of books do you enjoy?" I hesitated. My father had always told me I could only handle simple books, children's books, nothing too complex. But the truth was that I had been secretly reading whatever I could find, and I gravitated toward things that were supposed to be beyond my comprehension. Science fiction, I admitted, physics, philosophy. She raised her eyebrows. "Really? That's wonderful. What are you reading now?" "A Brief History of Time" by Stephen Hawking. "And are you understanding it?" I think so, but I'm probably missing a lot. I'm not very smart." The woman's expression changed to something I couldn't identify. "Who told you that you're not very smart?" "My family, the doctors, everyone. I have brain damage from when I was a kid." She was quiet for a moment. "You're reading Stephen Hawking, understanding it, and working a job. That doesn't sound like someone with significant cognitive impairment to me." "But I have documentation, medical records. I'm legally disabled." Medical records can be wrong, diagnoses can be incorrect, and sometimes people are told they're disabled when they're not, for reasons that have nothing to do with their actual abilities. She handed me her business card. "My name is Dr. Patricia Morrison. I'm a neuropsychologist. If you ever want a second opinion about your cognitive abilities, please call me. I'd be happy to do an assessment pro bono." I took the card, though I didn't believe I would ever use it. She was being kind, but she didn't understand. I really was disabled. Everyone had told me so. But the conversation planted a seed of doubt. "Hey, I need to know something right now. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. Globe showing Americas. Are you in Los Angeles or New York, London or Sydney? Maybe Toronto, Mumbai, Mexico City, Lagos, Berlin, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Manila, Johannesburg, or somewhere I've never even heard of. I want to see this comment section light up with every corner of the globe, because Daniel's story, this story about being trapped by lies, about having your reality manipulated, about finding the strength to question everything you've been told, this is universal. So comment your location right now. Let me see how far this reaches. And while you're down there, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Over the next several months, that seed of doubt grew into something bigger. I started paying attention to things I had always accepted without question. I started noticing discrepancies between what I was told about myself and what I could actually do. My father said I couldn't handle complex tasks, but I had reorganized the hotel's entire inventory system, creating an efficient tracking method that saved hours of work each week. My family said I couldn't understand financial matters, but I had noticed errors in the hotel's accounting and had quietly corrected them without being asked. The doctors said I had significant cognitive limitations, but I was reading graduate-level physics texts and understanding them well enough to discuss the concepts intelligently. What if they were wrong? What if I wasn't actually disabled? The thought was terrifying. If I wasn't disabled, that meant everything I had been told about myself was a lie. It meant the last 15 years of my life had been based on a false premise. It meant my family had been using me. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. 6 months after meeting Dr. Morrison, I called her. The assessment took place over 3 days at her private office. She tested my cognitive abilities across every domain: verbal reasoning, mathematical skills, spatial processing, memory, executive function. When she gave me the results, her expression was grave. Daniel, I'm going to be very direct with you. You are not intellectually disabled. You have never been intellectually disabled. Your cognitive abilities are not just normal, they're exceptional. Your IQ is 164, which places you in the 99.98 percentile. You are, by any measure, intellectually gifted. I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. That's not possible. I have medical records. I've reviewed the medical records you provided. The diagnosis of post-meningitis cognitive impairment was made by a single doctor, based entirely on parental reports rather than objective testing. Every subsequent diagnosis referenced that original assessment without conducting independent evaluation. The entire chain of diagnoses is built on a foundation of one doctor's opinion that was never properly verified. But my family, they've been taking care of me because I'm disabled. Why would they lie about that? Dr. Morrison's expression became even more serious. Daniel, how much do you know about your family's finances, specifically about your inheritance? My inheritance? Your grandmother left you $12 million. Are you aware of that? I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. 12 million. No, she left money to the family, but I thought it was divided evenly. It wasn't. She left you the largest share. And if you're not actually disabled, your father would have no legal right to control that money. But if you are disabled, if you're declared incompetent, then as your guardian, he can use the funds however he wants. The implication hung in the air between us. You think my father lied about me being disabled to steal my inheritance? I think that's a possibility you should investigate. I also think you should know that if disability benefits have been collected on your behalf based on a fraudulent diagnosis, that's a federal crime. And if someone has been using your inheritance without proper authorization, that's theft and fraud. She pulled out several documents. I'm giving you copies of your assessment results. I'm also giving you contact information for an attorney who specializes in disability fraud and guardianship abuse. What you do with this information is up to you. But Daniel, you need to understand that you are not who they told you that you are. You're brilliant, you're capable, and you've been systematically deceived for reasons that have nothing to do with your actual abilities. I left her office in a state of shock. Everything I had believed about myself, everything that had defined my existence for 19 years, had been revealed as a lie. I wasn't disabled. I had never been disabled. I was a prisoner. The next few months were the most disorienting of my life. I continued working at the hotels, continued living at home, continued playing the role of the simple, disabled son. But internally, I was processing a complete reconstruction of my reality. Every memory from the past 19 years now looked different. My father's concern was actually control. My family's care was actually exploitation. The therapy I had been doing was actually unpaid labor that would have cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars if they had hired actual employees. I had been used, systematically, deliberately, comprehensively used. And they had gotten away with it because they had convinced me, and everyone else, that I was too impaired to understand what was being done to me. The anger came slowly, building over weeks and months until it was a constant presence, but alongside the anger was something else, clarity. I understood now what had happened, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single day of the 19 years they had stolen from me. But I needed to be smart about this. If I confronted them now, they would have time to cover their tracks, to destroy evidence, to construct a narrative that made them look like well-meaning parents dealing with a disturbed son who had developed paranoid delusions. No, I needed to document everything. I needed to build a case so comprehensive that they couldn't talk their way out of it. I needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. So I started gathering evidence. I obtained copies of all my medical records, highlighting the inconsistencies and the lack of objective testing. I documented my work hours at the hotels, creating a detailed log of 19 years of unpaid labor. I researched my grandmother's actual will, the real one, before my father forged a replacement, and found a copy filed with the probate court. I also did something else. I started recording everything. I bought a small digital recorder that I kept in my pocket at all times. Every conversation with my family, every interaction where they discussed my disability or my limitations or how they were managing my money, I recorded all of it. Over 3 years, I accumulated hundreds of hours of recordings. My father discussing how much money he had made from my inheritance. My mother joking with friends about how convenient it was to have free labor. My sister complaining that I had received more inheritance than her, not realizing that she had access to hers while mine had been stolen. I documented disability fraud, the monthly benefits collected on my behalf that I never saw. I documented wage theft, years of full-time work with no compensation. I documented guardianship abuse, the systematic control of my life and my assets without proper oversight. And I documented the forged will, the document my father had used to gain control of my inheritance. By the time I was 27 years old, I had an evidence file that could support multiple federal charges and civil lawsuits that would bankrupt my family and send my father to prison. But I still waited because I wanted more than just their punishment. I wanted their complete destruction. I wanted to take everything they had built with my stolen money and make it mine. The opportunity came when the hotel business started to fail. My father had overextended. He had used my inheritance to expand aggressively, taking on debt and opening new properties faster than the market could support. When the economy softened and travel declined, the hotels started losing money. Within 2 years, the business was in serious trouble. Occupancy rates were down, revenue was falling, debt payments were crushing. My father had to sell 2 of the 5 hotels just to stay afloat. The family's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. The mansion was mortgaged. My sister's trust fund had been raided. The comfortable lifestyle they had built on my stolen inheritance was collapsing. And still, no one thought to pay me for my work. I was still housekeeping, still cleaning toilets, still being told I was lucky to have a job at all given my limitations. When I was 28, my father made a final desperate move. He looked for outside investors to save the business. He needed approximately $20 million to pay off debts and restructure operations. He contacted private equity firms, wealthy individuals, anyone who might be interested in investing in a struggling hotel chain. Most people took one look at the financials and walked away. The business was too far gone, the debt too substantial, the management too incompetent. But one investor expressed interest, a private investment firm called Apex Holdings, which specialized in distressed hospitality acquisitions. They were willing to consider a buyout, purchasing the entire company, assuming all debts, and restructuring under new management. For my father, it was a lifeline. He would lose ownership, but he could negotiate consulting contracts for himself and executive positions for my sister. He could extract himself from the disaster he had created while preserving some income and dignity. The buyout negotiations took 6 months. During that time, I continued working, continued documenting, and continued waiting for exactly the right moment. That moment came at the final buyout meeting, scheduled for a Tuesday in November. The meeting would formalize the acquisition. Apex Holdings would take ownership of all assets, assume all liabilities, and the Hartley family would transition out of operational roles. My father had never asked who owned Apex Holdings. The negotiations had been handled by lawyers and business managers. He assumed it was some faceless investment group, some wealthy strangers who saw value in the hotel properties. He had no idea. The meeting was held in the conference room of the flagship hotel, the original property that my father had expanded using my inheritance. The room was filled with attorneys, accountants, and business advisors from both sides. My father sat at the head of the table, with my mother and sister beside him. They were dressed professionally, trying to project confidence despite the fact that they were losing the family business. I was not at the meeting. I was, as usual, working, cleaning the executive bathrooms on the floor below, doing the job I had been assigned for the past 14 years. Or at least that's where they thought I was. At exactly 2 p.m., the door to the conference room opened, and I walked in. I was dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than my father had spent on my clothing in my entire life. I carried a leather briefcase and was flanked by 3 attorneys and 2 FBI agents. The reaction was instantaneous. My father's face went from confusion to recognition to shock in the space of 3 seconds. "Daniel, what are you? Why are you dressed like that? You're supposed to be working." "Good afternoon," I said, my voice calm and professional. "My name is Dr. Daniel Hartley. I'm the founder and majority owner of Apex Holdings, the company that is purchasing your assets today." Complete silence. "Dr. Hartley," my sister found her voice first. "You don't have a doctorate. You didn't even finish high school." "Actually, I have 2 doctorates, one in business administration from Stanford, which I completed online over 6 years, and one in hospitality management from Cornell, which I also completed remotely. Both programs accepted me based on my exceptional academic abilities and my extensive practical experience in the hotel industry." I set my briefcase on the table and opened it. "I also have an IQ of 164, which places me in the 99.98 percentile of cognitive ability. I am not, and have never been, intellectually disabled. The diagnosis that has defined my life for the past 19 years was fraudulent, created by our father to gain control of the $12 million that our grandmother left to me." My father was shaking his head frantically. "This is insane. He's having some kind of episode. He's mentally ill." "I'm not mentally ill, but I appreciate you saying that, because it's exactly the kind of statement that supports the guardianship abuse and disability fraud charges that are about to be filed against you." I turned to the FBI agents. These are Special Agents Martinez and Chen from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. They've been investigating this case for the past 8 months, based on evidence I provided. They're here to witness this transaction and to ensure that all relevant parties are present when arrests are made. My mother had started crying. My sister looked like she was going to be sick. I continued. "Over the past 19 years, you have committed multiple federal crimes. You fraudulently obtained disability benefits on my behalf, collecting approximately $847,000 in payments that you diverted for your personal use. You forged my grandmother's will to gain control of my $12 million inheritance. You forced me to work for your business for 19 years without compensation, violating labor laws and denying me wages that would have totaled over $600,000. And you maintained this fraud through systematic psychological abuse that convinced me I was intellectually disabled when I was actually gifted." I pulled out documents and began distributing them. "These are the criminal complaints that will be filed today. Disability fraud carries up to 10 years in federal prison. Forgery and inheritance fraud carries up to 20 years. Wage theft and labor violations carry additional penalties. You're looking at 40 years minimum if convicted on all counts." My father finally found his voice. "You can't do this. We're your family. We took care of you." "You enslaved me," I said, my voice hardening. "You stole my money, my labor, my identity, and 19 years of my life. You made me believe I was broken when I was brilliant. You kept me in a cage made of lies and convinced me the cage was protection." I turned to my lawyers. "The acquisition will proceed as planned. Apex Holdings is purchasing all assets of Hartley Hotels for $1, plus assumption of all debts. The current management, including Jonathan, Susan, and Amanda Hartley, will be terminated effective immediately with no severance, as their employment was obtained and maintained through fraudulent means." I looked at my father directly. The hotels you built with my stolen inheritance now belong to me. The house you bought with my money will be seized as proceeds of fraud. The lifestyle you maintained by exploiting me is over. I pulled out one more document, a thick file that represented years of work. This is a civil lawsuit seeking restitution for the $12 million you stole, plus interest and damages. Given that you used that money to build a business now worth approximately $18 million, I'm seeking full value of the current assets plus punitive damages. The total claim is $40 million. My sister finally spoke, her voice shaking. We don't have $40 million. The business is failing. We're in debt. I know, which is why this acquisition is structured the way it is. I'm buying the business for $1, which means I'm acquiring assets worth $18 million while assuming debts of approximately $16 million. Net value, $2 million. Still significantly less than the $12 million you stole from me, but it's a start. I closed my briefcase. You have 90 seconds to make a decision. You can cooperate with the federal investigation, provide full testimony about what you did, and plead guilty to all charges. If you do that, the prosecutors have agreed to recommend concurrent sentences rather than consecutive. You'll serve 15 years instead of 40. I paused. Or you can fight this. You can claim I'm lying, that I really am disabled, that this is all some elaborate delusion. And when you do that, I will release every single piece of evidence I've collected over the past 4 years. Hundreds of hours of recordings where you discuss the fraud in your own voices, documents proving the forgery, expert testimony about my cognitive abilities, testimony from every doctor who evaluated me and found nothing wrong. The case will go to trial, you'll lose, and you'll serve the full 40 years. I looked at my watch. 90 seconds starting now. The room was absolutely silent, except for my mother's quiet sobbing. My father was staring at me like he had never seen me before, and in a way, he hadn't. He had never seen the real me, the intelligent, capable man I actually was. He had only ever seen the fiction he had created, the disabled son who couldn't threaten his control. At 70 seconds, my mother spoke. We'll cooperate, please, Daniel. We'll do whatever you want, just, please don't destroy us completely. You destroyed me for 19 years, I said quietly. But unlike you, I'm not going to take everything. I'm going to let the legal system determine your punishment. I'm going to let a jury hear what you did and decide how long you should be in prison. I turned to the FBI agents. They've agreed to cooperate. You can proceed. The agents read my parents and sister their rights and took them into custody. They would be processed, arraigned, and either held or released on bail depending on flight risk. The attorneys finalized the acquisition documents. Within 2 hours, I owned every asset that had once belonged to Hartley Hotels. The hotels that had been built with my stolen money were now legally mine. And the family that had stolen 19 years of my life was facing decades in federal prison. I walked out of that conference room and into the lobby of the flagship hotel. I stood in the space where I had worked as a housekeeper for 14 years, where I had cleaned floors and emptied trash and been invisible to everyone who passed by. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt instead was free, completely, finally free. Free from the lies, free from the cage, free from the identity they had forced on me. I was Daniel Hartley, not Simple Jack, not the disabled son, not the charity case. I was Dr. Daniel Hartley, genius, business owner, survivor. And I was just getting started. The trials took place 18 months after the arrests. My father, mother, and sister all pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation and testimony. The sentencing was staggered. My father received 15 years in federal prison, my mother received 10 years, and my sister received 5 years plus restitution obligations. The civil lawsuit was settled before trial. I received ownership of all remaining assets, plus a structured payment plan for the difference between what they stole and what I recovered. The disability benefits fraud case resulted in additional penalties and repayment obligations that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Financially, legally, and socially, they were destroyed. As for me, I spent the next several years rebuilding, not just the hotel business, but myself. I formally came out as a person without disabilities, which required extensive documentation and legal processes to undo 19 years of fraudulent records. I worked with advocacy groups to share my story and push for better safeguards against guardianship abuse. I also went back to school, this time in person, at Stanford, where I completed an MBA and made connections with people who saw me as an equal rather than a charity case. The hotels were restructured and modernized. I implemented everything I had learned during my years of observation, all the efficiencies and improvements I had quietly documented in notebooks while my family assumed I was too simple to understand business. Within 3 years, the hotel chain was profitable again. Within 5 years, it had expanded to 8 properties. Within 7 years, I sold it to a major hospitality group for $65 million. I used part of that money to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting people with disabilities from exploitation and abuse. The foundation funds legal advocacy, supports guardianship reform, and provides resources for people trying to escape exploitative situations. I named it the Margaret Chen Foundation, after my grandmother, the woman who had seen potential in me when I was 8 years old, who had left me an inheritance because she believed I would do something meaningful with it. She was right, it just took me longer than either of us expected. Today, I'm 43 years old. I have a PhD in organizational psychology to go with my other credentials. I consult with businesses on preventing workplace exploitation. I speak at conferences about disability fraud and guardianship abuse, and I use my story to help others recognize when they're being manipulated and controlled. I also reconciled, in a limited way, with my sister. She served 3 years of her 5-year sentence and was released on parole. When she got out, she reached out to me, not asking for money or favors, but asking if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. She looked different. Prison had stripped away the entitlement, the arrogance, the casual cruelty. What remained was someone who seemed genuinely broken by what she had participated in. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I know what we did was unforgivable, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what you went through, what we stole from you, and I'm sorry." "Did you know?" I asked. "Did you know I wasn't really disabled?" She was quiet for a long time. "I suspected. By the time I was in high school, I could tell you were smarter than anyone gave you credit for. But it was easier to believe what Dad said, because believing you were disabled meant I didn't have to feel guilty about the advantages I had. I chose comfort over truth." "And the inheritance. Did you know Dad was using my money?" "Not at first, but by the time I was in college, I figured it out. And I didn't say anything because I was benefiting from it. My tuition, my trust fund, my lifestyle, it was all subsidized by what he stole from you." She started crying then. "I was complicit. I participated in your abuse by doing nothing, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." I didn't forgive her that day. I'm not sure I ever fully will, but I appreciated her honesty, and I agreed to maintain limited contact. We're not close, we'll never be close, but we exchange occasional messages, and I've helped her financially a few times when she was struggling after prison. She's my sister, that's a fact, but it's not a relationship built on trust or affection. It's a relationship built on shared history and a fragile hope that people can change. As for my parents, I haven't spoken to them since the trial. My father is serving his sentence in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. My mother is in a facility in West Virginia. I receive occasional letters, mostly from my mother, asking for contact, asking for another chance. I don't respond. What could I possibly say? They stole 19 years. They stole my identity. They stole the person I could have been if I had grown up knowing I was brilliant instead of broken. No apology can give that back. But I've built something anyway, not the life I would have had if they hadn't lied to me, but a different life, a good life, a meaningful life. I'm married now to a woman I met at a conference on disability rights. She's a lawyer who specializes in guardianship abuse cases, and she was one of the first people who treated me like the intelligent person I actually am rather than the disabled person I was pretending to be. We have a daughter. She's 4 years old, brilliant and curious, and completely unaware that her father spent 19 years being told he was too stupid to function independently. I'm teaching her that intelligence comes in many forms, that labels are often wrong, that the only person who can define her limitations is herself. And I'm making sure she knows that she is valued not for what she can produce or achieve, but simply for existing. Last month, I visited the flagship hotel for the first time since selling the chain. It's under new ownership now, completely remodeled, barely recognizable as the place where I spent 14 years cleaning toilets. I stood in the lobby, the same lobby where I had been invisible for so long, and I thought about the boy I was at 8 years old, before the meningitis, before the lies, before everything went wrong. That boy had potential. He was curious and smart and full of possibilities. The lies tried to kill that boy. They tried to bury him under 19 years of fake diagnoses and forced labor and systematic gaslighting. But he survived. He became me. And I've spent the last 15 years proving that the people who tried to break him were wrong about everything. They said I was disabled. I have an IQ of 164. They said I could never live independently. I built and sold a $65 million business. They said I should be grateful for their care. I sent them to federal prison. They tried to define me. I defined myself. That's my story. That's my victory. And every day I wake up and choose to be the person they said I could never be. I win again. First, thank you. Thank you for witnessing Daniel's journey. Thank you for caring about what happened to him. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes that justice matters. Now I need you to do something. Like this video if it moved you.